Mike McCarthy is out as the Dallas Cowboys head coach. We'll break down that decision next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the postseason with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed no matter what you do with your first bet, whether you win or lose. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are breaking down the Ohio State, Texas. No, we're not going to do that. That's what we were going to do. We were going to talk about the NFL playoffs and the college football playoffs. But instead, Landon, we got some Cowboys news. They are moving on from Mike McCarthy as the head coach. Your thoughts?
So many thoughts, I guess the first thing we should start with is kind of my initial thoughts, which was surprise. I think we had
shocked.
just to get to just an hour before previously, we had gotten some news that the Cowboys had kind of not started negotiating yet, which still kind of was phrasing it as though this was too big to come, that negotiation was to come and that this whole situation was still ahead of itself. And before we knew it, suddenly it's over. The negotiation is done, and that there is no more negotiation that's going to happen, and that Mike McCarthy is not going to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys in 2025. So I think I'm still kind of dealing with the speed in which it went from, man, they haven't even started, to negotiating, to, oh, it's over. I think that's the initial thing that, that's part of just living on social media. And then I have to say, look, maybe it's the optimist in me, but I have to say that I feel like I felt the first bit of positive feeling I felt about this front office in a little while, because they were willing to put their foot down about this situation. I think, a lot of people we can sit here and debate whether or not Mike McCarthy should have come back and the merits of that, and whether he should have gotten a 5-year deal or a 3-year deal, which, I'm sure those are all parts of why the deal didn't go through, and what McCarthy wanted versus what the front office wanted. But I think at the end of the day, the thing that is most heartening to me about this situation is that the front office looked at the situation, was not willing to give Mike McCarthy carte blanche after what they had experienced, had a specific number or a specific scenario in mind for which they wanted Mike McCarthy to return. And when those parameters weren't met, and it didn't look like that specific scenario was going to be played out, they weren't going to cave on the situation. They were willing to put their foot down and move on. And I'll even go so far as I wouldn't be surprised if they had made this decision a while ago and were kind of just doing a lot of this maybe for show, for the locker room, for the fans. But I just think the fact that they were willing to move on from Mike McCarthy, I think that's a positive, that they're willing to do something to make changes that they need.
I've had mixed feelings this whole time about what the Cowboys should do with Mike McCarthy, because I do think he's a good coach. And I've been saying this since they hired him. I think he's always been a little bit of an underrated head coach. I thought he did a pretty good job with the Cowboys over the last 5 years. But I will also acknowledge it does feel like he's not the coach to get them to the next level, right? So that should make it an easy decision to move on. I'm also a little afraid that they just don't know necessarily how to hire coaches, and that you might get a coach that's worse. But I think the unknown of, hey, you might get somebody that's actually better, you might stumble into the right coach, was at least appealing enough for me to move on. Now, here's the thing that I think is really interesting, Landon, is we're saying that the Cowboys moved on. I'm not so sure it was the Cowboys that moved on. I was listening to a report from Jane Slater today, and she said that McCarthy just got kind of tired of the contract negotiations and not really knowing where the Cowboys stood. So he just told them, I'm gone, right? And he went to his assistants and the other coaches on the staff and said, "Hey, I'm not coming back. You're free to go look for other jobs." And I think there was, with all these teams hiring their coaches, all the assistants were also in limbo. I wonder how much of it, if it's McCarthy kind of putting his foot down and saying, "Hey, I'm just done with this. I want to move on as well. Let's get this over with."
And look, there's no reason this couldn't be a mutual parting of ways, right? Like, I think, we've had this idea that both sides have wanted this to continue, but I think that the reality of it is that both sides probably wanted it to continue under their own terms, right? With Mike McCarthy, having an upgraded salary with maybe a lengthier contract, and then maybe the Cowboys viewed a shorter term situation where they actually were giving play calling duties to somebody else, or
but my question is though, Landon, if you've even come to the conclusion that you want McCarthy back, let's say on a 2-year deal, let's just say like a small term deal, how could you not figure out a way to get that done? Like, if you've come to the decision that you want McCarthy back in some form or fashion, how do you not get it done?
Because I think that ultimately at the end of the day, I think one thing that we can maybe agree on, and maybe not, but I don't know that the Cowboys were all that convicted in re-signing Mike McCarthy. If they were convicted in re-signing Mike McCarthy probably would have been re-signed. If you wanted Mike McCarthy back, you don't have a problem signing him to a 5-year deal. I think that they wanted Mike McCarthy back under a very specific set of terms, and when that didn't play out, I think they were willing at that point to go, okay, no, you know what? Now it's time to just move on. I think from their point of view, it's like, hey, Mike, we're willing to give you another shot at this. And from Mike's point of view, it's, hey, I should be rewarded for this great job I've done. I should get a pay raise and all that. Those are two very different stances on contract negotiations. I can understand how they weren't able to bridge that gap. And certainly it's not, I think when they go into these situations, they don't always have just one scenario in mind. I think that they'd have to have a contingency. Maybe they looked more and more, they were eyeballing that contingency plan more and more as the negotiations were going on and going, you know what, like, why are we banging our head on this wall that we feel like we haven't been able to break through anyways? Maybe it's time to start fresh.
My other question is, why now then? If you decided that you wanted to start fresh, which again, I'm totally in favor of, why not do it as soon as the season is over so that you can get a start on the coaching search? And again, I'm not saying that the Cowboys missed out on Mike Vrabel, because I didn't really want Vrabel to be the coach anyways, but you missed out on the opportunity to interview him. You missed out on the opportunity to interview Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, because now you can't interview those guys until, I believe, after the conference championship games, assuming they make it to the Super Bowl. Why wait?
I don't have a good answer for that, honestly. I mean, and certainly not going to defend every aspect of what the Joneses are doing. That's for sure. But I will say that they haven't really missed anything, like you said. Like, I understand the why wait at like questioning, but at the same time, like, the opportunity to interview Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, like, unless those two get hired, and let's be clear, Ben Johnson's not really an option for this team unless the Cowboys are really changing their stance. And frankly, unless Ben Johnson is really changing his stance on the kind of team he wants to go to.
But shouldn't that be telling if you can't even get an interview with Ben Johnson?
No, because I don't listen. I love the idea of Ben Johnson, the play caller, but the idea of giving Ben Johnson the kind of control that he wants over an organization when he's never done anything remotely close to this before, like, be reasonable. Like, that's scary. Like, I understand that. I understand.
I'm okay though with scary though at this point, right? Like,
that's fine. That's okay. But I think it's also reasonable to understand, like, to be wary about giving any one of these kind of hot at the moment play callers full control of your franchise when, I mean, let's be honest, the vast majority of those situations fail. I'm not suggesting Ben Johnson's going to be like that, but like, I guess my point is that there's this idea out there that like Ben Johnson can't fail, and Ben Johnson is asking for a lot for a first-time head coach. So I can understand why some organizations are not just willing to, especially organizations that haven't done that since Bill Parcells, who had, let's face it, a much better track record than Ben Johnson did when they did it. I don't think that the Cowboys are just willing to just hand that over again. And whether that's good or not, I think that is debatable. I think that that's just something that they're not willing to do. So, yes, they may have cut themselves off for maybe one or two of these candidates, but honestly, I don't know that they have, because if there is a coach that was, I mean, again, for better or for worse, if there's a coach out there who wants to be the head coach of the Cowboys, I have a feeling that they'll wait till get the interview when it's time for the Cowboys, when they come calling for it.
It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Let's talk about some potential head coaching candidates that the Cowboys could go after here over the next several weeks. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. And that's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I've used LinkedIn Jobs myself, and I can tell you it's an absolute game changer when it comes to hiring the right fit. Small businesses are wearing a lot of hats, so every hire is crucial. LinkedIn gets that. That's why they connect you with the best candidates using data that you can't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockdownNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockdownNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to get the most out of these final weeks of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It is the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply just pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or just want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving this platform. Here is a special offer for Locked On Cowboy listeners. Download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Later, let's talk about some potential head coaching candidates. Maybe the Cowboys should use LinkedIn to help get a better hire here. I'm sure they've got good data. Who would you say are some of the favorites for the job?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, at this point, look, it's crazy like to kind of get reinserted back into this conversation when, it feels like we've tapped out for the last month. But I think it's got to be a lot of the same names that we've kind of kicked around here. I mean, I think it's got to be some people that are familiar. I think it's got to be or people that have experience. And I think that's where my eyes go to first. I think if you're looking at kind of the younger, newer direction sort of head coaches, I mean, the closest that you're going to get to that, I think, is someone like Kellen Moore, who is, obviously we are all very familiar with. I think that kind of would satisfy the familiarity aspect that the Joneses like, while still being kind of a fresh, new, young coach type of hire that maybe could inject some excitement into the team. Who knows? I think outside of that, you're looking at, potential other guys who have had experience here, I think Vrabel would have been a candidate. I think Ron Rivera will probably get an interview. I think, Anthony Weaver is a guy that, I mean, look, you put your hand in your head, but these are guys who are going to get interviews probably. I'm interested
Pete
to
Carroll.
see, though. Pete Carroll, I think, now that you start to see his name kind of come up a little bit, he'll get a look-see, I imagine, or at least they'll banty his name about again. It'll be interesting to see. Like, I think if we all know the names of the kind of available head coaches that have had experience, that have either won a Super Bowl or the more tread on their tires type folks that are available out there. It'll be interesting to see if the Cowboys change their stance here now and try to pivot to something different. I don't necessarily expect them to, but at the same time, I didn't necessarily expect them to not re-sign Mike McCarthy. So is Joe Brady a name that kind of gets more consideration? Because I do think that if you're looking at, Bill's offensive coordinator, I think if you're looking at situations where, guys that maybe can be somewhere between those two categories, right? Like not quite the long in the tooth, coaching veteran types, but also not quite the a guy that has coaching experience. Joe Brady's a guy who's at least been around the block in both college and the NFL a little bit now. He's got a couple different offenses with some success. Maybe a little bit more experience than, or maybe similar to Kellen Moore. I think he's a guy that we'll get some looks at. Obviously, Liam Cohen is someone who is probably more on the other end than what they would look at. Just all the names that you've seen kind of thrown about on these other teams that are being interviewed. I think most of them will be inside the candidates, the Cowboys kind of net of candidates that they'll cast out, except for maybe some of the guys like I said, Ben Johnson. I wouldn't be shocked if Liam Cohen is not someone who's interested with the Cowboys, but I don't know. Maybe he would be.
First of all, Joe Brady fits my criteria of like somebody wears joggers and wears a chain around his neck calling plays. So so that's here again. I'm really nervous about the coaching search, but one of the things that I would love to see that would make me feel optimistic about the direction of this franchise is if they just had an extensive search. Right, last time they had an opening, they interviewed two candidates. It was Marvin Lewis and Mike McCarthy. And the only reason they interviewed Marvin Lewis was to satisfy the Rooney Rule. Like, I want them to hire or to interview 5, 6, 7, 8 different candidates. And I would love to see those candidates be from different backgrounds. Like, hey, here's a defensive coordinator. Here's a offensive coordinator. Here's a former head coach. Here's a special teams coach. Here's a college head coach. Just get some different voices and ideas maybe in that front office. But I'm going to be really frustrated if it's two guys and they already know exactly who they want to go out and hire.
Yeah, and that's why I hope that this is a little bit different and that they kind of are trying a different direction here, and they went the route of the kind of more veteran experienced head coach, and it really limited their options. And I'm wondering if they look at the situation like, hey, we went out with this in mind. We got a guy that, frankly, we couldn't tailor any better to the type of head coach we want to hire, and it still didn't work out. So maybe we need to try something a little bit different. Maybe we need to get some newer ideas in here to kind of help break through. Look, we were supposed to talk about these other games, today. I'll just throw this in. After watching, the likes of Baltimore and some of these other teams play, the Bills, again, speaking of Joe Brady, these teams just have something on offense that the Cowboys are not just going to be easily acquiring in the offseason without, some major changes, so a major draft pick or some major scheme changes, right? So maybe it's time to find a way to get the schematic edge by bringing in one of these younger guys. I'm not holding my breath, but my hope is that, look, this is the best time for you to get your hopes up for the Cowboys to be searching for a new head coach, because Jerry Jones yesterday had to watch the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles both advance to the divisional rounds of the playoffs, and nobody's talking about the Cowboys in any sort of positive manner. So maybe that'll light a fire to Jerry to try something different.
So you mentioned the Ravens, and this is where
this is another name I was going to mention. Yeah, so go ahead.
Todd Monk. No, Todd Monken is one of my favorite candidates for the Cowboys. He's not a younger head coach, a coaching candidate. I'm looking at his age right now. He's 58. He's going to be 59 here in a couple of weeks. So he's not Joe Brady or Ben Johnson, but wherever Todd Monken has gone, he's won, and his offenses have been innovative. I look at what he's done with the Ravens over the last couple of years. Lamar was an MVP last year. He might be the MVP this year. Before that, he was the offensive coordinator at Georgia where they won back-to-back national championships. He was in Tampa Bay in 2018 when that offense was putting up monster numbers. He was the head coach at Southern Miss. When Southern Miss was awful, he came in there and instantly turned them into a contender. I think they won 9 games his first year there. I think Todd Monken, if you want to get somebody else out there that's not necessarily a young guy, but is innovative, I think he's one of my favorite options.
I just mentioned Brady is that kind of guy that's like the in-between guy. Monken is the dead center guy, right? He hasn't ever done the head coaching thing in the NFL. He has been a head coach at a major college program. You mentioned Southern Miss, right? Like not an SEC program, but still a major college program, right? But tons and tons of experience, all a very variety amount of experience at offensive coordinator, an experienced coach, an older guy who has, maturity, has is good leadership qualities, but also can bring in some things. Look, he doesn't need to have a running quarterback like Lamar Jackson to design an interesting and a good running game. You saw that at Georgia as well. They didn't necessarily have mobile quarterbacks while they were at Georgia, but they were still able to scheme things up that was lighting defenses on fire with what he was doing on offense. So I think
listen to this. So when he took over the team, they were 0-12. Okay, 0-12. A year and a half later, they ended up winning Conference USA, the West Division. Like, that's how quickly he turned things around. And I know he hasn't been a head coach in the NFL, but man, everywhere he's gone, he's been so successful. He is one of the guys that I would love to interview.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think he would be a guy if the Cowboys were, I think if you see his name on an interview list for the Cowboys, that's a positive sign that they're taking this very seriously, that they're looking at potentially getting some interesting scheme guys in here, that maybe they're recognizing they need a kind of change in a search to get the right kind of guy in here as the head coach.
All right. I want to give you some like off the wall names, and I just want you to react to some of them. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We're getting we're going to have some awesome games this weekend. I cannot wait. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are just better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. We have a great Monday Night Football game on tap for tonight. Plus, the divisional round looks absolutely phenomenal. Go check out all the lines and odds over on FanDuel. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day, one in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. I'm sure they're going to be talking about Mike McCarthy. So if you want even more coverage of the McCarthy news, go check it out over on Locked On NFL. All right, Lane, let's talk about some other names that are going to be mentioned for the Cowboys. And I just want your thoughts on if they were to hire this person, would you like it? Would you not like it? Let's start with Deion Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about Deion Sanders. I wouldn't understand it. Like, I just don't. What does Deion bring to the team? Like, what he brings to college football and to the Colorado is he's an incredible recruiter. He's a name that people are going to gravitate towards in the world of NIL, where players have a lot more freedom to go wherever they want. He's going to be a draw to them. That's not a thing in the NFL. I mean, obviously free agency is a thing, but I just don't know that he's
I think he brings energy and vibes, right?
Yeah, I don't think energy and vibes is enough to be a head coach in the NFL. It is to be a college coach, but I just don't think he brings enough X's and O's prowess and guaranteed, improvement in any specific way that can translate to the NFL. At least not right now. I think right now he's a college coach, and he is going to be an effective one in the world of the post NIL college football landscape.
Now I'm going to bring up some names that Jerry Jones has mentioned in the past. What about John Gruden?
I mean, let's set aside the reason that he's no longer talked about anymore and how offensive that stuff is. Let's pretend like that doesn't exist for just a second, which is hard to. But I think, look, I lived in Tampa when they won their Super Bowl in 2002. And what happened to that team after they won the Super Bowl is that they gave John Gruden more personnel control. And then he kind of took that team and absolutely destroyed it. And then you were covering the Raiders during the John Gruden era. So, I mean, you could tell me as well as I can tell you.
They had 7 first-round picks in 3 years, and one of them ended up being somebody that made it to the final year of their rookie contract.
I think I trust him more than other retread head coaches to call a modern offense. But
Sure.
all the other parts that come with John Gruden, I'm completely uninterested in.
I tend to agree. Jason Witten.
Jason Witten's not.
I mean, he's mentioned
not a legitimate candidate.
Okay, I hope you're right. Let's just say I hope you're right.
I hope I'm right too, buddy. I really do.
Kellen Moore. We mentioned him a little bit already. I think he's the favorite. How would you feel about Kellen Moore being their head coach?
Look, I mean, I think I don't get the same excitement for him that I would get like for Brady or for some of these other younger play caller types, because I think we've seen it. I mean, honestly, even though his team is going to the divisional rounds of the playoff, I still had some questions about some of the play calls that we saw at different points last night with the Eagles. I think it would be interesting because it brings an interesting blend of familiarity with, cutting edge. I do think the thing about Kellen Moore that I like is that he has a willingness to constantly expand and try new things. And I think that that's something that's been sorely needed in a lot of ways around here. But I also, first time head coach, I don't really know like how that's going to work with him. Who's calling the plays? Is he calling the plays when he's a first time head coach?
I know.
Like that's a lot. So I have a lot of questions, I think. I certainly don't mind the fact that you're taking the Eagles offensive coordinator away from them. But I also, like I said, I have kind of mixed feelings about the aspect that is supposed to be the selling point with Kellen Moore.
Sure.
I have a lot of questions if it's Kellen Moore, but I think I would be intrigued, not quite upset.
All right, let's do some rapid fire on some of these coaches. Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, has been a head coach in the past, so you do get that. Also, one of the best defensive coordinators in the entire NFL.
Interested, but still falls under the category of who's the play caller.
Okay, Bill Belichick.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered this. Like, no, just simply because of all the names that he's going to want. Even though Josh McDaniels is probably going to get taken by Vrabel, I'm scared of who else he would hire if he got hired.
Matt Nagy, who is the current Chiefs offensive coordinator, was the head coach of the Bears.
I think Matt Nagy, to me, is pretty thoroughly proven that he can't be a head coach. I don't know. I mean, that situation in Chicago was tough, but I also think that Nagy
I would interview him, though. He would be a guy that I would interview.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, if he would ever be interested in becoming an offensive coordinator anywhere else, I would be interested. But I don't know. I think as head coach, maybe not.
Okay, Steve Sarkisian, the Texas head coach.
Yeah, I think that's a name that I'm interested in. Certainly, look, he had some personal issues the last few times he's been a head coach before this. It feels like he may be through that. He clearly has done an incredible job with Texas. I doubt that he would leave that job, though, because he's probably getting paid more money than the Joneses would pay him, and he's probably got better job security.
Last one, Cliff Kingsbury. I know how you feel about Cliff Kingsbury, but there's a lot of people out there that want the Cowboys to bring in Cliff. What are your thoughts?
No, thank you. I'm not a big believer in his scheme generally. I mean, I think, you go back and look at Cliff's career, and he just so happens to constantly be around like generationally talented quarterbacks like that he didn't necessarily develop that kind of came like that. I don't know, man. I think it's a little bit too dry, and then add in the fact that I don't know that he's necessarily a very good head coach type. So we'll see.
What about Al Harris? Do you think he'll get an actual shot to be the head coach?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of don't think so. I mean,
I don't think he's ready yet. I think he needs
you're not
coordinator somewhere.
Maybe they do just kind of, maybe they give him an interview kind of as he doesn't, just to be clear, he couldn't be like the Cowboys are obviously going to do some casual loophole, interviews for the Rooney Rule. He doesn't qualify because I think they have to be outside candidates. But I do think the Cowboys could throw him a bone and interview him just to make it look good for his, his agent, or, just to kind of help Al Harris out. So, but no, I mean, unless he had like a really incredible rock solid plan and a superstar, offensive play caller that we're not thinking of, like in his back pocket, I just don't see it.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. We're going to be talking about the Cowboys head coaching search, I got to believe, for the next several weeks. Knowing the Cowboys, they're going to have this thing drag out for forever. So make sure that you're following us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm @Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.